One of the biggest drawbacks to a monarchy is that each new ruler is a gamble. Sometimes you get a good one and your country will be prosperous for decades. Sometimes you get a leader that is completely unfit and will only lead your country to strife and ruin. We'll be focusing on the second part. I excluded rulers like Ivan the Terrible and Vlad the Impaler who were ruthless but actually pretty successful as leaders. They don't fit in with the people I will be telling you about. I also excluded anyone with too much debate about whether the claims against them are real or slander. Also, you have enough interest in history to click on a history video, so I am not going to waste your time talking about Nero and Caligula. Let's get going. In 1735, a new prince was born to King Hyegyong, and he would be named Hyegyong. He is also known by the posthumous title, Sado, which means thinking of with great sorrow. Although he was the second born, he became crown prince as a 1-year-old due to his older brother's death. When he was 9, he married Lady Hyegyong, whose autobiography gives us most of the info we have about what Sado was up to. Things started to go poorly for Sado when he was 10 years old. He developed some sort of illness that led to him frequently passing out. His father saw this as a sign of weakness. The king would often go out of his way to berate and belittle Sado. After Sado was made regent when he was 15, his father would make sure to criticize all of Sado's decisions in front of members of the court. This led to Sado developing severe anxiety issues. This also led to Sado being very close with the women in his family, including his sister, mother, and adoptive grandmother. His sister died in 1752, and his mother and grandmother died within a month of each other in 1757. Each of these deaths worsened Sado's mental state. The same year his sister died, he had a hallucination of the thunder god while reading scripture, and for the rest of his life, he was scared of thunder and the character that represented thunder. His first known act of violence occurred after a public humiliation session with his father. Afterwards, Sado brought the severed head of a palace eunuch in to show his wife. As time went on, a large part of his wife's job became finding replacements for all the palace staff he killed. One of the most dangerous times in the palace was when Sado was getting dressed. He had to have dozens of sets of clothes set out for him, and the ghosts that talked to him would inspect them. He would obviously burn the ones the ghosts didn't like. If any of the servants did not follow this ritual to Sado's liking, he would beat or even kill them. One time, his second consort, who he had multiple children with, bothered him while he was getting dressed, and he beat her to death. Not long after this, in 1762, Sado's erratic behavior led others in the palace to believe that Sado was trying to kill his father. This was unforgivable. For Korean royalty, there were very strict rules about defiling a royal, as well as worries that executing Sado would mean killing his wife and children as punishment as well. To get around this, his father got creative. He didn't kill Sado. He simply ordered Sado to climb into a chest meant for rice, and then it locked. On the 7th day, Sado stopped responding, and on the 8th day, he was taken out of the chest and buried. Sado was 27. After this, the king forbade the mention of Sado. When Sado's son became king, one of his first statements was that he was the son of Prince Sado. He also gave his father a more respectful title and a new burial site, with a brand new fortress to honor him. His wife joined him there when she died in 1816. Sado has also interestingly became a popular figure in South Korean pop culture. He's often portrayed as a sympathetic figure that was a victim of circumstance. They tend to leave out the part where he beat hundreds of people to death at the behest of his fashion ghost. Let's roam on to our next topic. Next, we're going to Istanbul back when it was Constantinople. In the year 565, Justin II became the emperor of the Byzantine Empire, also known as the Eastern Roman Empire. The first few years of his reign were filled with the normal activities of an emperor in this era, losing land to the Germanic people and persecuting his least favorite Christian sect. Things would change after he invaded Persia in 572. Justin had some initial success, but soon the Persians started pushing back the invasion. The Persians even started taking control of Byzantine cities. When Justin II received the news that he had lost the city of Dara in 573, he snapped. He would skitter and crawl around the palace, hiding under furniture like he was trying to sneak up on Frodo. Sometimes he would start sprinting, trying to get to a window to throw himself out of it. His wife, Sophia, had to hire people to come and bar the windows. She had large guards wheel him around in a custom mobility throne. When Justin would get the zoomies, it was their job to chase him and hold him down. This would often lead to a Tysonian response from Justin where he would bite and beat his guards. The bites were bad enough that rumors started going around that Justin was eating his guards. He also required organ music to be played around the clock in the palace to keep him calm. In the meantime, Sophia was doing her best to hold things together. The next year, she even began peace talks with the Persians. During one of his more lucid moments, Sophia was able to convince Justin that they needed a new emperor. Justin adopted his general Tiberius as his son, making him the official heir. On December 7, 574, Justin was lucid enough to give a speech, officially giving Tiberius the title of Caesar. Justin made Tiberius the full and sole emperor, also known as an Augustus, in 578. Justin died 9 days later. Most of these stories came from a member of the Monophysites, who were the Christian sect Justin II was persecuting. I do think they are at least partially true though, because we know for a fact Justin II stepped down due to instability. An issue with covering this topic is that for the most of history, you weren't really allowed to criticize the royalty openly. Oftentimes, our records of bad or crazy rulers come from political opponents who won out. This makes it hard to know how much is true. The stories of these rulers also tend to take on a life of their own. For instance, Nebuchadnezzar II is mentioned as a king that goes mad in Judeo-Christian tradition. The thing is that there's no other record of him going mad. It does, however, mention at one point him being the father of Belshazzar. Belshazzar's father was a king called Nabonidus, whose reign saw the fall of the Babylonian Empire and was sometimes referred to as insane. It's likely that the names got mixed up either because Nebuchadnezzar II's real actions do feature prominently, and his name got carried over accidentally in translation, or this was getting back at him for sacking Jerusalem. On top of mix-ups like this, it's likely that rulers that were an issue were just not talked about, kind of like how earlier the king forbade talk of Sado. That's why Justin II is the oldest story in this video. Also, by the way, Tiberius would die 4 years after Justin, likely due to poisoning. In 1599, Maria Eleonora of Brandenburg was born. Her father was John Sigismund, the Elector of Brandenburg. The Elector of Brandenburg was a title that made him part of the electoral college that selected the Holy Roman Emperor. As Maria grew into a teenager, she became known as a beautiful and intelligent German princess. This attracted the attention of the young Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus, and they would eventually marry in 1620. This took a lot of political maneuvering due to her family having ties to Poland, which was chronically at war with Sweden in this era. In the end, Maria's mother, Anna, Duchess of Prussia, signed off, but this angered Maria's brother, George William, who had succeeded her father as Elector. Her brother also looks more like John Ratcliffe in Pocahontas than the real John Ratcliffe did. Maria spent much of her time being a patron of the various arts, trying to enrich the culture of Stockholm to try and create what she missed about Berlin. Gustav shared many of her same interests and supported her endeavors. Through much of their marriage, Gustav was away fighting in the 30 Years' War. Maria actually loved her husband, unlike most royal marriages, and was often distraught when he had to leave, even having issues eating and sleeping. This meant that she was often alone with only a few ladies in waiting to talk to because she was only fluent in French. This likely made what was to come even harder for Maria. A year into their marriage, she had her first miscarriage. After this, she became increasingly erratic. 2 years later, Maria gave birth to a daughter they named Christina. Christina died a year later. By this point, it was weighing heavily on Maria that her husband was constantly at war and could die at any time, and did not have an heir. The next year, Maria was pregnant again. She went with Gustav on the royal yacht to inspect their country's navy. A surprise storm moved in and almost sank the ship with them on it. Once on land, Maria yelled, "Jesus, I cannot feel my child." Her son was stillborn. After this, Maria was understandably severely depressed. Gustav even brought her with him during a less violent period in the war. This led to another pregnancy. In 1626, Maria gave birth to a healthy but somewhat strange baby. The baby was covered in hair and had a large nose. This apparently made everyone think the baby was a boy, but they later found out that the baby was a girl that would also be named Christina. When Maria was told that she had given birth to a girl, she yelled, "Instead of a son, I am given a daughter, dark and ugly with a great nose and black eyes. Take her from me. I will not have such a monster." It is often thought that Maria had postpartum depression. There's at least one confirmed case of Maria trying to hurt Christina. Christina also had a lot of accidents. A beam fell on her cradle. She fell down the stairs. And a nursemaid dropped Christina hard enough that her shoulders were uneven for the rest of her life. Maria had very little to do with Christina's early years. Gustav would take Christina with him to shoot cannons and review the troops. When Gustav was away, Christina was raised by his half-sister Catherine and his chancellor Axel Oxenstierna. But things changed when Gustav died in the Battle of Lutzen in 1632. Christina was not yet old enough to rule, so the Swedish government had to be run by regents till she was of age. Her mother was not included as a regent due to concerns about her mental state. Maria was convinced that this was normal and that she should just worry about her daughter. This didn't go well. Maria and Christina spent the next year in rooms with the sun completely blocked out. Their only light was from candles. They slept together in a bed every night, with Maria crying on Christina. Above them in this bed was a golden casket containing Gustav's embalmed heart. Maria would have long periods of crying for the rest of her life. In 1636, the regents finally saved Christina and sent her mother to live in another castle. Maria hated living in Sweden, and the only thing she liked about it was dead. She desperately wanted to go back to Brandenburg, but the regents wouldn't let her. She was later caught sending letters to the King of Denmark. Denmark was Sweden's enemy at the time. She was summoned to appear before court where her 13-year-old daughter had to try and convince her mother to stay in the country. Maria eventually snuck out of her palace and took a ship to Denmark. Her plan was to then go to Brandenburg, but her brother George William was still mad at her and wouldn't let her. Christian IV of Denmark was not happy that he was just kind of stuck with Maria now. He demanded payment from Sweden to take care of her. Christina eventually negotiated for her mother to be financially taken care of. After her brother died in 1640, Maria was finally able to go back to Brandenburg. She stayed there for 8 years till her now 22-year-old daughter convinced her to come back, so her mother would stop hurting the reputation of Sweden. In 1654, Christina abdicated the throne, giving the reins to her cousin, Charles Gustav. Christina and Charles had to go to Maria's residence to assure her that she would still get money. Maria died the next year and was buried next to Gustav and her earlier children. Maria's life seemed like a perfect storm. Stuck in a strange land, an absent husband, tragedy after tragedy, and enormous pressure. Christina would go on to convert to Catholicism, move to Rome, become very influential, and would eventually become one of the few women buried in the Vatican grottos. She's right next to John Paul II. There are also a lot of theories about her sexuality and her personal life. Christina led a very interesting and full life despite her early years. With her upbringing, it's amazing that Christina was even functional. If you want to know more about Christina, I put an article in the additional reading section. She had a very interesting life that was too big to cover in this video.
Ashen One, hearest thou my voice still?
In 1380, Charles V was killed by an abscess on his arm. Because of this, Charles VI, his son, became the King of France at the age of 11. For the first 8 years of his reign, the government was largely ran by his 4 Duke uncles acting as regents. They largely ran things in their own interest and messed things up. In 1388, Charles took full control as king and sent his uncles home. He also brought in some great advisors that would come to be known as the Marmouzets. With their help, Charles' early reign was promising. He was even called Charles the Beloved at times. But that started to change 4 years later. In 1392, Charles set off as the lead of a military expedition to Brittany to capture a man the Duke there was harboring. The man was a noble named Pierre de Craon, who sloppily tried to kill one of the Marmouzets over being kicked out of the royal court. Also, I can't find a good primary source for this, but from looking through genealogy sites, it looks like Pierre de Craon was brothers with the grandfather of the famous killer Gilles de Rais. Fun family. During this expedition, Charles seemed off. His speech was unusual, and he was overly impatient about the speed they were going. His mental endurance was further challenged near the city of Le Mans. A leper ran out of the woods and started yelling at Charles that he had been betrayed and needed to turn around. This went on for 30 minutes despite physical instruction directed towards the man. A few hours later, one of the pages in the group was having issues with the summer heat and ended up dropping a lance. The lance fell onto the helmeted head of another page. After hearing this noise, Charles screamed, "Forward against the traitors! They wish to deliver me to the enemy!" He then started hacking and whacking and slashing his own men. By the time the men in the group got Charles pinned down, he had killed several of his own men. Charles then went into a coma for some time. This was the beginning of Charles's mental decline. In 1393, an event further damaged Charles's mental state. They held a party at the castle to celebrate the birthday of one of the ladies-in-waiting serving Charles's wife, Isabeau. As part of it, Charles and 5 lords decided to wear costumes that made them look like beastmen and do a little dance for everyone. They made the costumes by getting sewn into full-body linen outfits that were then covered in pitch and hemp fibers. While the men were dancing, Charles's little brother, Louis, arrived and walked up to the men with a torch to see who was dancing. He caught one on fire, who then caught the others on fire. Charles was saved by his 15-year-old aunt, the Duchess of Berry, who threw her dress over him to shield him. One of the other dancers saved himself by jumping into a tub of wine to put the fire out. The other 4 dancers died and several knights were hurt trying to put them out. This went on to be known as the Ball of the Burning Men. Charles had more and more episodes as time went on after this. Later the same year, Charles forgot his name, his wife, and that he was king for a while. The same year, a regency council was formed with his wife at the head of it. Another time, Charles thought he was St. George for an extended period of time. Sometimes he would run around in a manner so worrisome that they ended up having to wall off some of the doors to make it easier to keep him from running off. He also refused to clean himself or his clothes for a few months. One of his stranger issues was that he thought he was made of glass. He even had iron rods put in his clothes so that if someone bumped into him, he wouldn't shatter. Charles was a bit of a trendsetter on this. He is one of the first known cases of glass delusion. There was a Bavarian princess named Alexandra that thought that she had swallowed a glass piano and would die if it broke. One guy thought he was a glass vase and stayed in bed so he wouldn't break till doctors set the bed on fire. This apparently cured him because he realized that he didn't break while he was beating on the door that they had locked to keep him in there. This delusion is much less common today. The theory is that people in this period had clear glass on the mind because it was the hot technology of the time. This may have been the ye-old equivalent to thinking the government put a microchip in you. While all this was going on, so was the 100 Years' War. Things were not going well. After the French lost the Battle of Agincourt, the Treaty of Troyes was signed. This treaty handed the French throne over to Henry V of England, with the plan of his son Henry VI inheriting it. Part of the reason for the French accepting this treaty was to replace Charles with a competent ruler. Charles died just 2 years later in 1422, seemingly ending French independence. Except Henry V died a few weeks before Charles. Also, Henry VI was just a baby. This gave Charles' son, Charles VII, a chance to fight for the throne that had been taken from him. Charles VII would eventually come out on top. One of the big things that helped him was that even when Henry was done being a baby, he was not a very good ruler. We don't have as many details as we do about Charles VI, but Henry VI also had severe periods of mental health issues where he was unable to function as a leader. He would often go catatonic, not responding to anything going on around him for weeks or months. Henry VI's instability was disastrous for him. Under him, England lost the 100 Years' War to France. Also, because so often other nobles had to step in to take control and keep the country running, said nobles started to feel that they should be king. This led to the civil wars known as the Wars of the Roses. It also led Henry VI to being the last king of the House of Lancaster and dying in the Tower of London. Well, that's all I have for you. Subscribe, follow me on Instagram for rat pictures, and have a great day and eat something good.